You are now ready for the last step of your Kandinsky color study project. To finish this last step, we're going to be using watercolor paint. And before we do that, I would like to just review how to properly set up your workstation to use watercolor paint. So you and your neighbor will first of all have to get some newspaper. Make sure that your piece and your neighbor's piece overlap in the center. And I'm representing your newspaper with these pieces of green card. And remember, it needs to be horizontal. Then the paint needs to go between you and your bowl of water. So those are the things that you're going to share here in the middle. Then you put your project on yours and your neighbor will have theirs. You each need to have your own piece of paper towel. And of course, you'll each need your own paintbrush. So this is how you would set it up. If you were working with a neighbor, it's important to remember to overlap, because if you have your newspapers like this and you put your paint right there on the table, it really doesn't do you any good. Now, if you're working alone, you would just keep everything consolidated right on your piece of newspaper. So to set up our project then, you will have a piece of newspaper. You will have your paint. You will have water, paper towel, and a paintbrush. You need those things. And I like to keep things kind of all on one side. That way I don't drip on my project. So if you go ahead and get your station set up with your project, then we will be ready to get painting. So at this time, if you could just hit pause on the video, set yourself up, and then hit play when you're ready to paint. So hopefully you have it set up, and now we're going to talk about watercolor painting. When you colored, and you colored hard and firm, and you really filled everything in very solid, the reason you did that is because we were doing what's called a resist. The paint resists, the crayon resists the paint. Because this is waxy, the paint can't stick to it. So we're going to paint right over our crayon, but the paint will not hide the crayon. So what you're going to do is wet your brush and put 1 drop of clean water on each pan of paint. Now, if your paint is already really wet, you do not need to do this. I am not going to use the black and the brown for this. Please just use the purple, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red, the colors of the color wheel. Remember, when you use watercolor, you rinse and you scrape, and then you blot just a little bit, and you only pick up the puddle of paint. You never scoop watercolor out. You always are touching the tip of your brush in that puddle that's floating on top of the paint. So I'm just going to start in this lower corner here. When you paint this, please be sure that you try to keep your edges pretty neat. Now with watercolor paint, after you lay the paint down, you don't scrub like this. That's not the right way to watercolor. The right way to watercolor is to pick up the puddle of paint, move it around, and then just kind of let it be. Now you can just let it float on top of the crayons there and dry like that, a little speckly, or you can take a paper towel and blot that off like that, and it gives it kind of a nice textured look. Notice I'm not scrubbing, I'm blotting. If you scrub, you are going to hurt the paper fiber and it'll end up getting all like have little balls of paper floating there. And maybe on this one, I'm going to use green. Now notice I didn't do the one right next to it. I'm going to let this one just have a couple minutes to dry. When you put watercolor right next to other watercolor that's still wet, it has a tendency to bleed together. And we don't want that to happen too much. Again, if I start to scrub, I know I need to get more paint on my brush. I'm going to spread that paint out like so. Then I'm going to turn my paper, and I'm doing it kind of like a checkerboard. I'm skipping around. On this one, I think I want to try some orange. Oh, and maybe that wasn't the best choice because of the orange circle. And that is what this project is about, is just experimenting and seeing how colors look like next to each other. So this one I think I am going to blot off. Maybe what I could do, since I think I'd like this a little bit, I want a little more contrast there. Maybe what I do then is go back in with some red and let some red run together with that orange. I'm just going to dab some red on there. Blot again. Now careful when you blot, because if I blot this with the dirty blue area, it's going to leave some marks. I like how that looks with the two colors together. So this is what I'd like you to do now. I would like you to go through and paint every other square, and then go back and do the other squares. If you mess up and do them in a different order, it really doesn't matter. But experiment with one color in a box or two colors and just see what you get. But please do stay away from brown and black. They have a tendency to overpower your project just a little bit. Okay, so have fun experimenting with color. Remember, we rinse and scrape and blot, and we only pick up puddles of paint. If there aren't puddles, you need to dab a little more water on there before you pick the paint up. Also, please don't tap your brush on the side of your bowl. That will get drips all over your paper, the table, and everybody else's project around you. Okay, have fun experimenting with color.